initially it was just writing, it was reading, but he came into philosophy, he learned about history, politics. He became very, very well-read. And nowadays, being well-read has different connotations, or not connotations, different realities, I should say. If you say someone is well-read nowadays, oftentimes it's just they just go on the internet a lot. And that's not really a reality of being well-read. Because now, the internet has, what's the difference between an internet website and a book? Anyone? Sorry? Book is physical, true. What else? Sorry? A book doesn't change, good. Yeah. What else? Say it again?
It can be less summarized.
What is?
The book.
Okay, good. The book can be less summarized. Sorry. At least in the past, books had to be factual. In most cases. If it wasn't, it'd be known as a fiction tale. It'd be a fiction book. Internet website, you can buy a .com. I can buy a .com. You can buy a .org. Only a .edu and .gov you can't get. You can get a .info, a .com, if you're in Canada, a .ca, a .org. All of these things you can just purchase. You can make it look really professional and you can put any information there. So when people go online, they're looking at information. A lot of the information has no proof of veracity. So when people, this is one of the dangers of the internet. It's one of the dangers that people go on the internet and they read things and there may be no truth to it whatsoever. Whereas you go to a library and you find a book, and the book is under the non-fiction category. The majority of the time that is going to have been fact-checked. So Malcolm read books. There was no internet back then. And when he read books, he gained information and knowledge based upon those books, and he began to apply to his life immediately. And one thing that he did was he never backed down to any opposition. Malcolm, in his conversation with Elijah Muhammad in jail, he began to discuss with him and began to actually become sort of favored by Elijah Muhammad. And so there's one incident here that comes forth in his last year in prison. Last year in prison, he was in Charleston prison. And everyone began to recognize that Malcolm had changed. And they knew he wasn't someone that you can mess with, that you can deal with. Everyone had this understanding. And so now, when he was in prison, and he would be reading, he would be studying, and he'd be attending classes. And one day in Charleston prison, he saw that a lot of his African American, or he refers to his Negro brothers, they would attend a Bible study class. Who conducted the Bible study class? A tall, blonde, blue-eyed Harvard seminary student, i.e. a perfect devil. Harvard, we know its reputation. Harvard seminary, like divinity school where you go and study religion. And blonde-haired, blue-eyed, the perfect devil, tall. There's a white man that the blacks refer to as the devil. And he lectured and he taught whatever he taught. And then he started to a question-answer session. So Malcolm, as he was already studying, he started reading the Bible as well. Now, I don't recommend we read the Bible yet. First, read your Quran. Now, you might say, I read Quran all the time. Read it with translation. Read it with tafsir. Understand it first. You can't jump into the Bible before you understand Quran. In the Nation of Islam, it might be different because of the fact that they didn't really follow the Quran like we follow the Quran. That's why they're not necessarily Muslim. But anyway, Malcolm had read the Bible quite thoroughly. And this student of knowledge, of the seminary study, he also seemed to be very knowledgeable. And so he was talking, then he opened up for question and answer. And so finally, Malcolm was thinking, how can I upset him? How can I throw him off? He was thinking, finally I got it. So he raised his hand. The man nodded. So he said, I stood up and I asked, what color was Paul? And I kept talking with pauses. He had to be black because he was a Hebrew. And the original Hebrews were black, weren't they? And Malcolm said he had started flushing red. You know the way white people do, he said. And so then when Malcolm asked this question, the person says, yes. But I wasn't through yet. What color was Jesus? He was Hebrew too, wasn't he? And he's throwing these pauses in between. Now, both the Negro and the white convicts had sat bolt upright. I don't care how tough the convict, be he brainwashed black Christian or a devil white Christian, neither of them is ready to hear anybody saying Jesus wasn't white. The instructor walked around. He shouldn't have felt bad. In all the years since, I never met any intelligent white man who would try to insist that Jesus was white. How could they? So then what did the man finally say? He said Jesus was brown. I let him get away with that compromise, Malcolm mentions. Exactly as I had known it would, almost overnight the Charleston convicts, black and white, began buzzing with the story. Whenever I went, I could feel the nodding, and anytime I had a chance to exchange with a black brother in stripes, I'd say, my man, you ever heard about somebody named Mr. Elijah Muhammad? Malcolm became firm in his conviction of his religion. Now, there's a few lessons to learn from this. The first lesson is learn your religion. So more often than not, you see people, they try to propose things about religion to throw us off, and the answers are very simple. For example, I met a Muslim. I'll ask this question openly. How many of you know the age of Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha when she got married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Yes, how old was she? How old was she when she married the Prophet? I didn't hear you. 40? No, it's not 40. It's going to throw some of you off. I'll give you the minority opinion first. Yes? No, how old was Aisha radiallahu anha? Sorry, I think I misasked that. How old was she when she married the Prophet? The Prophet was about 53, 51, 52, 53, around that age when he married her. How old was she? I don't know if I should get into this. I don't want to throw you guys off. So the minority opinion, the lesser opinion, she was between 16 and 18 years old. What's the majority opinion in hadith? So don't listen to me completely before you start passing judgment. She was 6 years old when the contract occurred, not the actual marriage, when the contract occurred. And when she moved in with him, she was how old? 9 years old. This is hadith. Not only hadith, it's Sahih hadith. It's in Sahih Bukhari. And who says this hadith? Aisha radiallahu anha herself says this. Now people say, whoa, what's up with that? I've heard Muslims say, like, what is this? I can't accept this. So just stop and take a step back. If a non-Muslim came to you and said this in school, and they might, in college they will, in high school they might, what would you say? What would your response be? How many of you right now are like blown away, like, oh my God, I didn't know that? So what would you respond?
Wasn't it like a common thing?
Okay, well, that's a good point. Do you know that for sure?
Well, I know one thing that even in like some European countries, even until 100 years ago, they allowed women to get married at 7, 6 years old.
You know, actually, what's your name again? Hudayfa, yeah. That's actually in America as well. If you look at the age of consent in America, even like Delaware was the age of 6 or 7, 1 to 2. Until, even in America, people married. Islamically, we don't allow marriages to take place, consent at the age of 6 or 7. You can only get the contract signed. Then when she becomes an adult, you have to ask her, wait, do you want to marry him? And she says yes, then the marriage can take place. But in America, even the age of 6 and 7, until the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was the case. Now, that doesn't make it right that our Prophet did it just because it was done in America. And many states, 10, 9, 12, 11, Arkansas, Texas, California, these were the ages. Now it's older, now it's like 17, 16, etc. But number one, what it does prove was there's a common practice across the world. Different countries, Spain, 12, this was a common practice, number one. Now people might say, why was it a common practice? Well, think of it this way. Does anyone know what the Great Depression was? World War II? Yeah, exactly, perfect. At the end of World War I, the economy in our country took a negative turn. And people lost a lot of jobs. The stock market crashed, people lost a ton of jobs. Now, who's ever heard of a book called The Jungle? The Jungle is a book written by Upton Sinclair. It documents the life of child workers in the 1800s. Your age kids, full-fledged working. Now, you'd be like a parent by now. How old are you? 16? 18? Yeah, you'd be a full parent by now. Yeah, if you're 16, 17, 18, you've already been married, kids. You obviously, why is that the case? Well, before the Great Depression, what was the average life expectancy in America? Under 50, about 48, 47, 49, around that. So if you're going to die before 50, are you going to wait till 25, 30 to have kids? No, because now we wait till like 25 to get married because we're living till like our 70s. If you're going to die before 40 and you get married at 25, 30, you only have like 10 years, 20 years left with your kids. It was too young. It was too late, too old. So people married early. This is why some of your grandparents even may have had children by the time they were 13. We had a helper in our home, like a hired maid helper in our home in Zambia, Miss Harriet. Miss Harriet was like my age. Her daughter had a baby and she was only 12. It's common in non-Western countries. So let me go back to what we're talking about. So in the Great Depression, when that occurred, people lost their jobs. So when people lost their jobs, children were the first ones to lose their jobs. In the Jungle, the book, you read how children would lose their hands and their fingers working in these shops and these companies, etc. It was gruesome. They didn't have labor laws back then. Then when the Great Depression occurred, people lost their jobs, so adults kept it, but even then they were losing it. Then the World War II took place, and then more manufacturing jobs occurred. Women began to work, but kids were not allowed to work. They were sent to school. The average literacy rate was between 9 to 11%. To graduate high school, only 9 out of 100 or 11 out of 100 kids in this country graduated high school. After the Great Depression, it skyrocketed. Why? Because kids were no longer allowed to work. Men went to war, adult women began to work, men came back, they began to work, children were not allowed to work anymore. Now the rates began to increase, 20, 30, 40, 50%. Kids were going to school again. Jobs were safer. Kids could no longer work and have limbs cut off, etc. People lived longer. So now the age life expectancy went to 60, 70, 80 years. It's almost 80 years now, 70-something years. So people can live longer so they can marry later. But people married young before because they didn't know how long they would live, one. So that's point number two. Point number one, as Hudayfa mentioned, was the fact that people around the world, including America, married extremely young. The age of consent, even not in Islam, was 7, 6, 8, 9 years old in this country as well. Even the founding fathers of this country, if you read the biographies, that's how old their spouses or their concubines or their whatever were. They were like 10, 12 years old. So before they accuse our Prophet of anything vile, that's how everyone practiced. Furthermore, even within the Arabian subcontinent, the Prophet ﷺ, did he ask to marry Aisha radiallahu anha? How did that marriage take place? Anyone know? Sauda radiallahu anha recommended Aisha. Another woman who was older at that time recommended her to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ then didn't respond to it. Allah then showed in a dream that he's supposed to marry her. Then and only then he went to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Abu Bakr didn't say yes. Why? 2 reasons. Reason number one, the Messenger of Allah were brothers. They weren't blood brothers, they were just really close friends. How can you marry my daughter? The Prophet said that we're brothers in the deen, not by blood, so it's permissible. But what's the other reason why he didn't say yes right away? Aisha radiallahu anha was already engaged to someone. And he wasn't a Muslim. He was a non-Muslim at that point, to whom he was engaged. That was the common practice. She was already engaged. Then Abu Bakr went to the family and said, what are we doing about my daughter and your son's marriage? To which they said, the husband said, talk to my wife. So the wife said, look, you don't follow the religion of our forefathers anymore. I'm not sure if I want my daughter to marry your daughter to marry my son, because I don't want him to become like you and worship Allah and not the idols. So we're breaking it off. So the husband said, okay, we're breaking off. Abu Bakr pretended to be sad. He was very happy. Broke it off, and then eventually the contract occurred, not the marriage. And then years later, after they migrated to Medina, the marriage took place. Why do I bring this up? The reason I bring this up is because if you hear this randomly in college or high school, people say, oh my God, that's not true. Then you read the hadith and you see it's true. You say, oh my God, my Prophet was a horrible person. Na'udhu billah, he wasn't. If you know all this background behind it, then it makes sense. There's other things. For example, when the Muslims fought in the Battle of Khandaq, after the Battle of Khandaq, The Prophet ﷺ had executed, according to some narrations, hundreds of men from Banu Qurayza, from a Jewish tribe. So people say, look at your Prophet, he hated Jews, anti-Semitic, and he killed people. Well, what's the story behind it? The story behind it was Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayza, all these Jewish tribes around Medina. They had come to a treaty with the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet in Mecca was a prophet. In Medina, he was a prophet. He was also the government leader. The political, people say jihad, look at you fighting, etc. Jihad didn't take place in Mecca. Only once the Muslims established a government did you have jihad. Tell me, does America have an army? A navy? Air Force, etc.? Does France have an army? Does the UK have an army? Does Britain have an army? Why do they all get one in a Muslim country? That was a Muslim government at that point. So we don't have any embarrassment. When before they were a government, the Prophet ﷺ did not go out in jihad. He didn't. Only after they became an established government in Madinah al-Munawwarah. Now, in a government, if someone commits treason, what's the punishment? In America, what's the punishment for treason? It's execution, it's death, even in America. Now, Prophet ﷺ had made what? Pacts. He made treaties with different communities. When the Battle of Khandaq, the Battle of the Ditch took place, the Muslims were vastly outnumbered, about 10,000 to 1,000. They were marching on Madinah al-Munawwarah, and no one in history had seen an army that large within Arabia. They're marching. Salman al-Farisi gives the idea we should dig a ditch. Did they dig a ditch all around Mecca? Around Medina? No, only one portion. There's 3 portions to the city. One portion was covered by, or you can say 4 portions to the city, by thick date palm trees from the farms where they would grow dates. So armies couldn't cross through there. Then there was the area, because Medina had sort of active volcanoes in the past that had jagged, dried, lavinous rocks. When lava dries, it becomes jagged. It's hard for people and animals to cross over it. So they didn't dig a trench over there. There's a third part where Banu Qurayza, who were in a treaty with the Muslims, that they didn't have to dig a ditch there. Why? Because they're in a treaty. They're our allies. They're going to defend us. We're going to defend them. So they only dug a trench around one area. So what did some of the Quraysh do? They came into Banu Qurayza and they made an agreement that you're going to now do what? You're going to break the treaty and you let us sneak in from this side to attack the Muslims from behind. So they broke the treaty. They broke a military and political and government binding treaty that what? Was to come to overthrow the Muslim government. So the Muslims, alhamdulillah, were victorious. But now your allies who came and betrayed you and tried to get you overthrown, what is the punishment? It's execution. Were the women executed? No. Were the children executed? No. Were the non-combatants executed? No. Were the Rabbaniyun, the people who were worshipping in the temples, were executed? No. The adult males who were involved in the army, they were executed. When someone says your prophet wouldn't kill hundreds of people, we're like, oh my God, did my prophet do that? But the moment you realize, no, it wasn't a random thing. It was when there was an actual breach. They broke the treaty and tried to get them to overthrow the Prophet ﷺ, then it makes sense. So when Malcolm here is speaking about, hey, let me tell you about Elijah Muhammad, one of the lessons we learn is that you have to learn your religion. You can't just be, yes, you should pray. Yes, you should fast. Yes, you should give charity. Yes, you should be good to orphans. Yes, you should be respectful and obedient to parents. Yes, you should be the best spouse. Except all those things are true. But if you don't know your religion properly, then people can throw doubts into the religion. They can throw doubts into the religion. Did you know? Let me just give another example. I know we're going a little off topic, but it's important to get this topic through. Did you know about the Qissatul Gharaniq? You know what Qissatul Gharaniq is? Anyone hear of a book called The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie? It's a fictitious book based upon Qissatul Gharaniq. The Qissatul Gharaniq speaks about that one time the Prophet ﷺ was reciting the verses of Suratul Najm, Suratul Najm. And when he was reciting the verses, Shaitan threw in words to the Prophet ﷺ's mouth. That rather than speak against the idols, he began to praise Lat, in Uzza, in Manat, these idols. And he began to praise these idols, and then the disbelievers, the Quraysh saw, oh, he loves our idols, so they bowed down at that moment. This is in tafsir. Did you know that? Doesn't that sound messed up? Did you also know that even though it's in some books of tafsir, it's a completely fabricated story? It's not true. Even though some scholars quote in hadith, it's a fabricated story. If someone comes and says, oh, look at your Prophet, this book of tafsir is showing he did this. But if you do the research, it's a made-up story. It actually made it into tafsir, but it's not a true story. That's why it's not in all books of tafsir, and many tafsir will say this is a false story. But if a person doesn't know their religion and they get challenged this way, then what happens is what? They're thrown off. Look, I'm not saying you have to become a scholar. Look, I'm a teacher. I'm an English teacher by profession, right? That's my undergrad's in English, my master's in education. I'm a teacher. That's my profession. But you have to study as well, because the way you practice your deen and defend your deen is by knowing your deen. That's how a person, there's so many people, so many Muslims you meet. They're physician, they're engineer, etc. But they know politics inside out. Why? It's their passion. So they can defend what's happening. They can give advice to what's happening to Muslim countries, etc. Because they know it, even though it's not their profession. So similarly, for all of you, you have to begin to study. Doesn't mean you have to take off years from your education. It does mean take out an hour a week. 2 hours a week to learn the basics of your religion, and then over the course of 10, 15, before I went overseas to madrasa, I studied 15 years part-time. People ask, well, how did you go to school and do your master's and have kids and a wife, etc., and still study? We studied, my wife and I, part-time for a very long time. 3 years full-time, then 15 years part-time. My wife studied 2 or 3 years full-time, then about 10, 12 years part-time. Then we went overseas to madrasa to finish our studies. But you can study a half hour twice a week, 1 hour once, twice a week, and build up your knowledge such that you don't miss a beat in school or in your profession, but become grounded in your religion. Now, Malcom was studying much more because he was in prison. And the majority of his time was spent studying because that he had that free time available. But he was intelligent enough, unlike the others in prison who maybe try to oppose him, to recognize that that free time he had at any given moment, he should spend doing productive things. So after he began to learn about grammar and learn about writing, he went into philosophy, he went into politics, he went into religion, self-study, until he was able to, as I mentioned over here, challenge the Harvard seminary student to this color of Jesus based upon their own text. And that's what made people now gravitate towards him. The next lesson you see was he was very proud of his religion. When people saw him, then he went to people and said, hey, you ever hear about Elijah Muhammad? I'm not saying you have to go to every person, go to Walmart and you're checking out and you're buying, what do you buy from Walmart? I don't know. Sorry, paper towels, you're buying your paper towels, right? And then the person's at the counter and you're like, hey, did you hear about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You don't have to say that. I'm not saying you have to say that. What I am saying is that we shouldn't be embarrassed of our religion. Are you Muslim? Yeah, but I'm not like those Muslims. Oh, just say, I'm Muslim, alhamdulillah. People sometimes, Muslims are so scared of being Muslim sometimes. Being Muslim doesn't mean you have to go, and you're at a red light and you stand in front of the red light. Everyone stop moving. Let me tell you about Islam. That's not what being Muslim is. Being Muslim is maintaining the principles that Allah has commanded upon us, told His Prophet ﷺ to teach us, and then living our lives in that manner. And when a person does that, there will be an automatic pride because there's an amazing reality of being Muslim. We have the solution to the financial crisis across the world because we understand usury as being an evil thing. I lived in Zambia, a country that's being crushed by usury. Islam removes that. We know how to give loans and how to have business investments without any type of usury. The musharaka model, all these different models that exist out there so people can buy homes, etc., without getting involved in usury. We have a welfare system that goes and reaches different people across the world that will not be polluted or corrupted. You know how they say, when President Trump was president and he gave such tax breaks to all the wealthy individuals, the upper class. We have a model where everyone is quote unquote taxed the same, 2.5%. If you happen to make $1 million, you're going to pay more, but still 2.5%. So that the people who are underprivileged and who are living in difficulty are now taken out of their difficulty and they're given honor. If you do that, what is the implicit result? If I turn to the poor and I take 2.5% from the wealthy and distribute it evenly to the poor, what else is affected? Anyone? Crime. Crime goes down because now there's not a reason to steal, because they're being given a resource by which they can gain an honorable way of living. So Malcolm, when he was preaching to the people in prison, it was out of pride and love for his religion. Today we hide our religion, many people, and don't want to be known as Muslim because of the fact that we don't know the reality of our deen. And the more you study, the more you'll see it. The more you see it, the more you'll have pride. The more you have pride, the more you'll be able to share it. The more we share it, the more others will benefit. And that's what happened in prison with Malcolm. And that's how Malcolm himself became prison. Now this is his final year in prison. After this, he is let go. When he leaves prison, Malcolm goes and begins to stay with his siblings. And he mentions that the most difficult thing for him to do when he left prison was what? As a Muslim, it wasn't waking up early for prayer, it was to bow down. Because for so long he built himself up as being someone proud before prison, etc. And now bowing down was very hard. But once he did it, he began to enter a new life of submission that brought him joy. And we're going to talk about his first years of attending the temple and being a preacher in the temple when we meet next. Next week, Arafah is Monday, so we could meet Sunday, inshallah. So we're going to meet Sunday. The week after, we're not going to have an Eid break. Let me explain why. Eid is Tuesday. So there's no need for an Eid break the Sunday that follows. You have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, hang out with family, inshallah. If you don't make it, you don't make it, no problem. I'm not going to force someone to come if they're unable to make it, but there's not going to be an Eid break because it's not on the weekend, okay? Or close to the weekend. And we're going to continue till the end of July. After that, we're going to have a bit of a break, and we're probably going to switch days then. Probably till Saturday. And I have to confirm that with my schedule as well, because Sunday we'll have Sunday school now, and then there's going to be a conflict then. So I'll stop over here. Any questions from anyone before we let everyone go? We're good? Okay then, inshallah. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallah bihamdik, nashhadu la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. As every week, please continue to pray Isha here. I'm going to go get my kids and then come back as well for prayer, as you see me in the back during Dhuhr with them. Okay?